Hello everyone, how are you? Welcome to our 10th lecture. If you remember last time, we stopped while we were talking about the significance of using symbols in literature. Today we are going to exemplify what we already started last time. Our first example is going to be on what we call the universal symbol and the significance of using the universal symbol. Our poem for today is William Blake's poem, The Lamb. William Blake's poem is actually an important poem in a famous collection of poems known as Songs of Innocence, which really marked the beginning of the Romantic period. The collection was published in 1789. That is 9 years after the actual beginning of the Romantic period in English literature. William Blake had two collections. One of them is Songs of Innocence, where the lamb is the principal symbol or the most important symbol, and Songs of Experience, where the principal symbol is the tiger. And notice the difference. The tiger, which is a predator, and the lamb, which is a prey. So it's no wonder that the lamb represents innocence, whereas the tiger represents experience. So as you can see here, we have a nice picture of the lamb, and you might imagine all the symbols associated with the lamb. So let us start by analyzing our poem and then trying to see how the symbol was employed by William Blake. Let us get started. First, we're going to have a look at the poem. The poem is The Lamb. And as you can see, it is divided into two stanzas. The first one is, Little lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee? Gave thee life and bid thee feed by the stream and over the mead. Gave thee clothing of delight, softest clothing woolly bright. Gave thee such a tender voice, making all the vales rejoice. Little lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee? Little lamb, I'll tell thee. Little lamb, I'll tell thee. He is called by thy name, for he calls himself a lamb. He is meek and he is mild. He became a little child. I a child and thou a lamb. We are called by his name. Little lamb, God bless thee. Little lamb, God bless thee. So this is our poem. Now let us go and try to analyze the poem. You must have noticed that the poem starts with a question. And the question is, who created you? Now, let us say who is the speaker? And who is asking the question and to whom? The speaker is a child, and the listener is the lamb. So the child asks the lamb about its origin. That is, how it came into being, how it acquired so many things. For example, how it acquired its particular manner of feeding. And this is exactly what we mean when we read something like, gave thee life and bid thee feed by the stream and over the mead. Who gave you this food? Who taught you this manner of feeding? Who gave you clothing of wool? This is the body cover of the lamb. Who gave you this body cover, which is very nice? As you can see here, we have the use of two visual images. One of them is the image related to the feeding of the lamb, and the other one is related to the body cover that covers the body of the lamb. Now we move to a different type of image, since we have been talking about images. Who gave you this tender voice? And tender is very nice and very soft. The voice of the lamb is so tender, because the lamb is the young sheep. So its bleating is very nice. Here we have the image of bleating. We can imagine ourselves hearing the bleating of the sheep. If we notice here, the poet tries to appear to the readers exactly as we expect a child. Children often ask such questions because, they often ask their parents, and their parents are seen as the authority that gives them answers. So the poem is very lifelike. Now, the child must have asked this question to his parents before. And now the child feels that he is now the authority. So he is asking the lamb about the creator. About the creator. So we notice that this is a very innocent and yet frequently asked question. In the next stanza of the poem, the speaker attempts a riddling answer to his question. The lamb was made by one who calls himself a lamb, one who resembles in his gentleness both the child and the lamb. Okay, now the child is not only an authority, but the child finds himself in a position to actually give a riddle or to put forward a riddle to the child, asking the child about the creator and telling the child that the creator is also a lamb. Okay, now how come that the child is a lamb? Actually, here we come to a very sophisticated religious issue, which is the idea of the amalgamation of the Christian script and the pastoral tradition. In the Bible of John, for example, we have a verse which says, "Behold, the Lamb of God, which takes away the sin of the world." Here we notice a reference to Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ, from a Christian perspective, was sacrificed on the cross so that he would save the human beings. And this is exactly why Christ is known as the Redeemer in Christianity. So the child is putting a riddle which says that the one who created you is also a lamb. And this is a reference to the Christian Holy Trinity. You know what I mean by Holy Trinity: the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. So the one who created you, the lamb, is also a lamb. So Jesus Christ is a lamb because he was sacrificed on the cross to save the human beings from their sins, and therefore he becomes the Redeemer. And the lamb is also an animal which is often slaughtered and sacrificed to save others. The idea of sacrifice. So we notice that the lamb is an example of selfless innocence and sacrifice. So the child identifies with Christ to form this kind of trinity: child, lamb, redeemer. And this resembles the Christian Trinity, which is the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So the lamb is a symbol of sacrifice. And this sacrifice could never take place without death. And death in itself is a tragedy. Okay? Then the poem ends with the child bestowing blessing on the lamb, asking God to bless the lamb. You see? So let us now have a closer look at the poem. The Lamb, as a poem by William Blake, has two stanzas. Each stanza contains 5 rhymed couplets. And obviously, if you go to your book, you will notice that what we have is a poem with 2 stanzas, and each one has a couplet. Little lamb, who made thee? You notice thee, this is a couplet. Feed, mead, another couplet. Delight and bright is the third one. Rejoice and voice, and then thee and thee. So we have, as we have said, we have a stanza of 10 lines, and every 2 lines rhyme together. And also we notice something that we also studied, and this is the refrain. And the use of the refrain here is very useful because it gives the poem the song-like quality. The song-like quality. It's very much like a song. If we add to this the flowing L's and the soft vowel sounds, we notice that this is really something that makes us see the poem as a song. Another purpose for these vowels and these consonants is to suggest the bleating of the lamb. The bleating of the lamb is often associated with the L or the B sound, according to the culture. And this also relates to a quality that we often find in children. Most of the time, children lisp. And I mean by lisp is like يلثغ in Arabic. So most of the time we notice that there is a very skillful use of sounds in the poem. So this poem is really a child's song in the form of a question and answer. Again, we notice that since this poem marked the beginning of the Romantic period, as I said early in the lecture, we notice that the first stanza can be safely described as rural and descriptive, while the second one sheds more light on the abstract spiritual matters and contains an explanation of the religious issues. So if you look at the child's question, you will notice that first it might seem to you as a naive, simple question. But if you contemplate the question, it's really a very profound one. The question, who made thee, which is in other words, who created you, is a simple one. And yet the child is really tapping into the deep and timeless question that all human beings have about their origins, about the nature of creation, about who created human beings, and even sometimes we go as far as asking questions about the shape and the identity of the creator himself. One of the figures of speech that we studied in this course is apostrophe. If you remember with how sad steps, O moon, one of the sonnets that we studied, I think you still remember apostrophe when he says, O moon. And I want to remind you of the definition. Apostrophe is a direct address of an object, of a thing or a person who might be present or absent. Here we notice that the child is addressing the lamb. But do we know for sure that the lamb exists? Okay, we are 100% sure that lambs cannot hear children. But let us assume that there is a lamb, but this still remains a kind of apostrophe in the in the poem. So it's really a poem with an apostrophic form, and this contributes to the overall effect of naivety, since the situation of the child talking to an animal is a believable one and not simply a literary kind of device used by the poet. So this is very important. Okay. We said that our lecture is about symbolism. So naturally, our question is going to be, what do we mean by the lamb? What does it symbolize? The lamb symbolizes Jesus. The traditional image of Jesus as a lamb underscores the Christian values of gentleness, meekness, and peace. And this is exactly what we have in stanza number 2 with words like meek and mild. As you probably know, a meek person is very humble. And you know, in Christianity, humility is a virtue. And probably you also know that pride is one of the seven deadly sins in Christianity. One should never be proud of himself or herself. So Jesus Christ is both meek and mild. And Jesus Christ also stands for peace. And in the Bible, there is always this kind of thing about the blessings of peacemakers. God blesses peacemakers. So, the image of the child is also associated with Jesus in the gospel. Jesus displays a special solitude for children. You know, solitude is the state of being alone. And also, the Bible's portrayal or depiction of Jesus in his childhood shows him as guileless and vulnerable. So, he is very sensitive and humble. So, these are characteristics from which the child speaker approaches the ideas of nature and of God, because God here is being contemplated. And you know, this is very common. We ask questions about God all the time, specifically when we talk about children. This poem, like many of the songs of innocence, accepts what Blake saw as a more positive aspects of conventional Christian belief, but it does not provide a completely adequate doctrine because it fails to account for the presence of suffering and evil in the world. You know, one thing I have to tell you about this poem is that this poem, The Lamb, which is the central poem in Blake's collection, Songs of Innocence, is often studied along with The Tiger, the poem in his second collection, which is The Tiger. Probably you know, or I mentioned before, that these two poems are seen as companion poems or let us say matched poems. In most of the anthologies that study literature and often offer selections, we find that these two poems are brought together to show two aspects of the human nature: the aspect of innocence and the aspect of experience. This poem really focuses on what we call innocence in the world. And notice the choice. The child is the one who speaks. And we often say that children are innocent, specifically because before the children are initiated into the world of adulthood. So they remain innocent. If you think of the lamb is also an innocent lamb, And most of the time, children feel sorry when lambs are sacrificed. So you have to keep in mind that despite all the goodness that we have in this poem and the beautiful world which is portrayed in the poem, we have to say, okay, but what about evil? So this poem really fails to explain why evil and suffering exist in the world. And that's why the second poem which is often studied with this poem, The Tiger, speaks about evil as the other pole, the system of polarization in the world: good, evil, bright and dark, hope and despair, optimism and pessimism. So, this poem is really nice to study, but at the same time, we should not be deceived into thinking that this world exists without evil, and that what we see in this world is just the lamb, the child, beauty, sacrifice, the blessings of the natural world. Yes, I wish things were like that, but they are not. So this poem fails to account for the presence of suffering and evil in the world. So the companion poem is found in Songs of Experience, and taken together, the two poems give a perspective on religion that includes the good and the clear, as well as the terrible and the inscrutable. So let us explain. The two poems have perspectives, definitely. No one disagrees about that. But part of the role of religion is to explain to the followers what we mean by good and what we mean by evil. All right. There are good things that everybody is aware of, and often we don't need to ask about. However, there are things that we need to understand, and these things are specifically associated with evil. Um, the spiritual and the intellectual revolution of the individuals is part of this. The dark side of the human nature is not mentioned in our poem, The Lamb. And again, this is related to the symbolism that we have in the poem. Could it have succeeded if the poem had the tiger or the lion as the major symbol? Of course not. Innocence, purity, spirituality do not go along with evil. So there are things that this poem will not explain. And these two pools are the terrible versus the innocent aspect. If this poem is easy to understand, so it represents the naivety and the simplicity of life. However, as we see here, there is another aspect that we call the inscrutable aspect, the aspect that we cannot explore, we cannot fathom. And that's why no one can really explain, whether in an educational context or otherwise, no one can explain the lamb without referring to the tiger. The two poems really complement each other to present a fuller account of life than either offers independently. No one can speak of good without mentioning evil. No one can speak of white without mentioning black. No one can speak of the prey without the predator. No one can mention God without mentioning the rebel, Satan. Okay? So the two poems put together offer a good instance of how Blake himself stands somewhere outside the perspectives of innocence and the experience he projects. So in order to have a complete vision, we need to look at both sides of the scale. Good plus evil. Now, okay. What do you think of this picture? I'm sure you will like it. Here we have the child plus the body cover of the lamb. I love the picture. How about you? Let us try and analyze the poem right now. Okay? The songs of innocence dramatize the naive hopes and fears that inform the lives of children and trace their transformation as the child grows into adulthood. Okay, these are big words, are they? Let us analyze them. Don't you sometimes wish you were still children? I always do. Children have very naive hopes, dreams, ambitions, and even their fears are very reasonable and they might even seem funny to us. Now, there is always this kind of initiation into the world of adults, of course, with all the pain that goes along with it. So, children often feel that they are suffering because they are being transformed as the child grows into adulthood. So, children will move from the stage of innocence. And who represents innocence here? We have two symbols of innocence in the poem. We have the lamb and we have the child. And also, in a way, we have Jesus Christ. According to the Christian doctrine, Jesus is the Son of God. So, what did Jesus actually commit in order to be sacrificed on the cross? Actually, Christ did not commit any sin, but he was sacrificed to redeem the human beings. So, we notice that innocence here is like a sort of trinity, as I said before. We have the child, the lamb, and Jesus Christ, the redeemer, the one who will redeem the human beings of their sins. Now, the nice thing is that our poet William Blake tries to write his poem from the perspective of children, while others are about children as seen from an adult perspective. Well, I think this poem is very nice because it is written from the perspective of a child who did not transcend innocence, naivety, or childhood. He is still in the stage of childhood. He did not transcend it. You know that there are certain literary works which are written about children, and this is a huge difference. About children as seen from the perspective of the adult. Probably some of you read the story of Arabi by James Joyce. When you read the story, you know that it's about an adolescent boy who is being initiated into the world of adulthood. But when you read the story, you will say to yourself, okay, is it possible that a teenager like the boy in the story was able to understand things the way they are presented in the poem? Well, is the boy capable of making such comments? And when you read very carefully and you read attentively, you discover that the answer is no. It couldn't have been a child or a teenager who wrote this thing. It's really someone who wrote his own story, but now he looks back using the awareness and the understanding of an adult. And here there is a big difference between this type of literature and that type of literature. Now, does our poem belong to the first group? I mean, the one written from the perspective of the child? Or does it belong to the second group, the one which is written about a child from an adult perspective? Obviously, it is number one. So the nice thing about this poem is that it has the innocence and the naivety of the child without being modified by the awareness of the adult. Well, many of the poems draw attention to the positive aspects of natural human understanding prior to the corruption and distortion of experience. Yeah, it's all the time nice to think of life before corruption and distortion. It's exactly like when we speak of Adam and Eve before the fall. And I think here Adam and Eve are not far away from the poem because we are speaking about something that is part of the scriptures, the fall of Adam and Eve from heaven. And isn't this associated also with the loss of innocence? Yeah, I'll tell you why. When God created Adam and Eve, they were very pure and innocent. They did not know good from evil. The ones who knew good from evil were God, the angels, and Satan. And when Satan tempted Adam and Eve and told them to eat from the forbidden tree, which is from the Christian point of view, the tree of knowledge, Adam and Eve lost innocence and they noticed that they are naked. And therefore, in the book of Genesis, it is said that Adam and Eve are now aware of the evil side of life and that they know good from evil, so they became equally responsible, like God, angels, and Satan, and therefore God expelled them from heaven. Had they remained innocent, they wouldn't have been expelled from heaven. So often, unfortunately, if we move from innocence to experience, we become aware of the corrupting and the distorted side of our experience. And as I told you so many times during our lectures, the thing is irreversible. No one can go back to innocence. Once we are initiated into the world of experience, we can never go back to innocence. However, others take a more critical stance toward innocent purity. For example, while Blake draws touching portraits of the emotional power of rudimentary Christian values, he also exposes over the heads, as it were, of the innocent. Christianity's capacity for promoting injustice and cruelty. Okay? So, being human means that we are aware of the good as well as the bad. It's not enough to remain innocent, we need to be experienced. And if we become experienced, and notice the symbolism here, we will move from the stage of the lamb to the stage of the tiger. And this is really important. Yani that's why we have these as central elements in the story. We move from one stage of our life to another stage. So, can we now decode the themes of the poem so that we could move to talk about symbolism in the poem? The first theme, I love these pictures of the lamb being fed. Theme of man and the natural world. And I believe that this is related to the romantic aspects in the poem. This poem Again and again, I will emphasize this. This poem represents the inauguration of the romantic period. And actually, when Blake published his two collections, this was the beginning of the romantic age. So, if you think of man and the natural world, we notice that in Romanticism, man and nature are united. Man is part of nature, and nature does not only include natural phenomena, it includes human nature. It also includes animals, and animals are fellow creatures. Um, don't forget the poem that I once mentioned about a romantic poet. I think he was Richard Burns, if my memory doesn't fail me. He wrote a poem in which he apologized to a mouse because romantic poets believe that we and animals share nature. Therefore, animals have the right to be with us. We notice the rural setting, the pastoral setting, so to speak. We notice reference to all types of natural phenomena, speaking of the valleys, speaking of the mead, and also the stream. We notice that we have nature as a source of life and inspiration in the poem, and we notice some philosophical aspects very close to what we call mysticism. Theme of innocence, and I elaborately talked about that in the lecture. The theme of religion is very clear. In the poem, we have the use of the Christian doctrine, the use of the Christian beliefs, and the Holy Trinity, and the idea on which Christianity is actually centered. All Christianity revolves around the theme of sacrifice in the Christian doctrine. We as human beings should be humble, meek, and mild, and Jesus Christ redeemed people by sacrifice. Don't forget that in Christianity, pride is one of the seven deadly sins. That's why the writer here stressed the idea of meekness and mildness. The theme of youth as one of the major stages of life, which means that we will pass the stage of childhood and we will be initiated into the world of adulthood. And when we do, unfortunately, we lose innocence, and this is something which is irreversible. So, now after this analysis of the poem, let us say that this poem can best represent symbolism, how the poet will choose an animal which really exists in the natural world to embody an idea. And the idea here is innocence. So the poet was able to use the symbol in a very skillful manner. The last thing that remains here is this symbol um, is this symbol universal or private? Okay, as I told you, this symbol is universal because anyone who is Christian understands the symbol. And now, since we live in a world which is similar to a small village, and even before that, everybody knows exactly that Christianity, um, that the lamb is a symbol of Christianity, and that Jesus Christ is the Lamb of God. Okay, guys? So here we come to the end of our lecture about universal symbols. Next time, inshallah, we will be studying Robert Frost's poem, Dust of Snow, as an example of what we call a private literary symbol. Till then, goodbye.